Deep within the fabric of reality lies a hidden algorithm, a set of rules so fundamental that they govern everything from the dance of subatomic particles to the formation of galaxies. For centuries, scientists have glimpsed pieces of this universal code, catching reflections of its elegant simplicity in disciplines ranging from mathematics to biology, physics to chemistry. The patterns that emerge across these diverse fields are not coincidental but rather manifestations of the same underlying principles that nature employs to build everything we observe. Our journey to understand this universal algorithm began long before modern science. Ancient civilizations recognized patterns in the night sky, the changing seasons, and the growth of plants. The Greeks searched for mathematical harmony in the universe, with Pythagoras declaring, "All is number." But it was not until the scientific revolution that humans began to systematically decode nature's building instructions. In the late 17th century, Isaac Newton's laws of motion and universal gravitation revealed mathematical precision in the movement of objects both terrestrial and celestial. His equations showed that the same force causing an apple to fall governed the orbits of planets, a unification of seemingly disparate phenomena that hinted at deeper patterns underlying reality. Newton himself recognized the profundity of his discovery, writing, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Yet Newton's classical mechanics was only the beginning. In the centuries that followed, scientists would discover that nature's algorithm operates across multiple scales and dimensions, from the quantum realm to cosmic structures spanning billions of light-years. What emerged was not a single equation but rather a set of interlocking principles that create complexity from simplicity, order from chaos, and life from inanimate matter. Consider the structure of a snowflake. In 1611, Johannes Kepler published on the six-cornered snowflake, one of the first scientific attempts to explain why snowflakes exhibit hexagonal symmetry. Each snowflake begins as a simple water molecule, but through the process of crystallization, these molecules arrange themselves in patterns of breathtaking complexity and beauty. What's remarkable is that this complexity arises from simple rules of molecular attraction and the hexagonal structure of ice crystals. No two snowflakes are identical because their growth is influenced by subtle variations in temperature and humidity as they fall through the atmosphere. This phenomenon, complexity emerging from simple rules, appears throughout nature. In 1970, mathematician John Conway devised the game of life, a cellular automaton where cells on a grid live or die based on just a few rules regarding their neighbors. Despite the simplicity of these rules, incredibly complex patterns and behaviors emerge, including structures that can replicate themselves. Conway's game demonstrated a profound truth. Elaborate systems can arise from minimal instruction sets. Nature employs this principle extensively. DNA, the blueprint for all life on Earth, consists of just 4 nucleotide bases: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, arranged in varying sequences. From this 4-letter alphabet emerges the staggering diversity of life, from bacteria to blue whales, mushrooms to human beings. The genetic code translates these simple building blocks into amino acids, which fold into proteins, which assemble into cells, which organize into tissues and organs, ultimately forming complete organisms of mind-boggling complexity. The discovery of DNA structure in 1953 by James Watson and Francis Crick, building on the X-ray crystallography work of Rosalind Franklin, revealed the elegant double helix that carries this genetic information. Crick later articulated the central dogma of molecular biology: information flows from DNA to RNA to proteins. This sequential process, governed by consistent rules, generates the vast tapestry of life on Earth. But nature's algorithm extends far beyond biology. At the fundamental level of physics, simple mathematical relationships describe the behavior of matter and energy. The standard model of particle physics, developed throughout the latter half of the 20th century, categorizes the elementary particles, quarks, leptons, and bosons, and describes their interactions through just 3 of the 4 fundamental forces. the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and electromagnetism. These forces, along with gravity, which has yet to be successfully incorporated into the Standard Model, dictate how particles combine to form atoms, how atoms bond to form molecules, and how molecules interact to create everything from stars to living organisms. The elementary particles themselves possess properties like charge, spin, and mass that determine their behavior according to mathematical equations of quantum mechanics. In 1957, physicist Eugene Wigner wrote an essay titled "The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences," pondering why mathematical concepts developed by human minds so perfectly describe physical reality. This question points to the algorithmic nature of our universe. It operates according to consistent mathematical principles that we can discover and express through equations. One of the most profound examples of this mathematical underpinning is the Fibonacci sequence, where each number is the sum of the two preceding ones: 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so on. The ratio between consecutive Fibonacci numbers approximates the golden ratio, approximately 1.618, which appears throughout nature, in the spiral arrangement of seeds in a sunflower head, the branching patterns of trees, the proportions of the human body, and even the structure of galaxies. These patterns are not merely coincidental but reflect optimal solutions to common problems in nature. The Fibonacci spiral, for instance, represents an efficient way to pack structures in limited space, whether seeds in a flower or leaves around a stem. Plants did not solve complex mathematical equations to arrive at these arrangements. Rather, natural selection favored those structures that optimized resources and function. Over billions of years, evolution has repeatedly converged on these mathematical optima. Evolution itself operates according to algorithmic principles. In 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, describing how natural selection drives the adaptation and diversification of species over time. The algorithm is remarkably simple. Organisms vary in their traits. These variations are heritable, and those variations that enhance survival and reproduction become more common in subsequent generations. From this straightforward mechanism emerges the astonishing biodiversity of Earth. The process has produced not just different species but wildly different forms of life, from single-celled organisms to complex multicellular creatures, from deep-sea creatures that never see sunlight to birds that navigate by Earth's magnetic field, from plants that trap and digest insects to mammals with self-awareness. Each of these adaptations represents a solution to environmental challenges, achieved not through conscious design but through the iterative algorithm of variation and selection. The compound eye of an insect, with its thousands of individual facets, evolved independently from the camera-like eye of vertebrates, yet both solve the problem of visual perception with remarkable effectiveness. In 2019, researchers at the University of Cambridge discovered that the compound eyes of flying insects evolved to maximize visual acuity while minimizing the energetic cost of maintaining and processing visual information. The hexagonal arrangement of facets in these eyes provides optimal packing efficiency, much like the hexagonal cells in a honeycomb or the hexagonal pattern of a snowflake. Again, we see the same mathematical principles emerging in different contexts. This convergence of form and function across unrelated lineages highlights a key feature of nature's algorithm. It consistently finds optimal solutions to similar problems, regardless of the starting materials. The streamlined shape of dolphins, sharks, and extinct marine reptiles called ichthyosaurs evolved independently in response to the hydrodynamic demands of swimming rapidly through water. Their similar body shapes reflect the constraints of physics rather than shared ancestry. The physics underlying these biological adaptations points to another aspect of nature's algorithm: the tendency toward equilibrium and efficiency. Systems naturally evolve toward states of lower energy or greater entropy, as described by the laws of thermodynamics formulated in the 19th century by scientists like Rudolf Clausius and Ludwig Boltzmann. Yet within this tendency toward disorder, pockets of order spontaneously emerge. Belgian physical chemist Ilya Prigogine, who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1977, demonstrated how dissipative structures can form in systems far from equilibrium. Given a steady input of energy, matter can self-organize into complex patterns, like the hexagonal convection cells that appear when a thin layer of liquid is heated from below. Such self-organization appears throughout nature, from the formation of crystals to the development of embryos, from weather patterns to the spiral arms of galaxies. The mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot observed that many natural forms exhibit fractal properties, patterns that repeat at different scales, creating structures of infinite complexity from finite, relatively simple mathematical rules. Consider a coastline viewed from space, then from an airplane, then from a cliff, then while standing on the beach examining individual rocks. At each scale, similar jagged patterns appear, a property Mandelbrot called self-similarity. He developed the concept of fractal geometry in the 1970s to describe these ubiquitous natural patterns that traditional Euclidean geometry failed to capture adequately. Fractal geometry helps explain not just the shape of coastlines but also the branching structure of lungs, blood vessels, and river networks. These branching patterns efficiently distribute resources through space while minimizing the energy required for transport. Another example of nature finding optimal solutions through its algorithmic processes. The circulatory system of mammals illustrates this principle beautifully. As the aorta branches into progressively smaller arteries, then arterioles, then capillaries, the combined cross-sectional area of the vessels increases while their individual diameters decrease. This branching pattern follows mathematical relationships that minimize the energy required to pump blood throughout the body. Similar scaling laws govern the relationship between an animal's size and its metabolic rate, a principle known as Kleiber's law, first observed in the 1930s. Geoffrey West and colleagues at the Santa Fe Institute extended this work in the late 1990s, showing that the same quarter-power scaling laws apply to organisms ranging from single cells to the largest mammals. The metabolic rate of organisms scales to the 3/4 power of their mass, while other biological times like lifespan and heart rate scale to the 1/4 power of mass. These consistent mathematical relationships reflect the fractal-like structure of resource distribution networks within organisms. Remarkably, West's team later discovered that similar scaling laws govern the growth and metabolism of cities and companies. As cities grow, their infrastructure needs increase only at about 85% of their population growth, creating economies of scale. Meanwhile, socioeconomic metrics like wages, patents, and crime increase superlinearly, faster than population growth. These findings suggest that the same mathematical principles governing biological systems may extend to human social structures. The universality of these scaling laws points to deeper patterns in how complex systems organize themselves, regardless of whether they are living organisms, human societies, or even galaxies. At every scale, from the quantum to the cosmic, similar principles of network formation, resource distribution, and energy minimization appear to operate. In astronomy, the formation of stars and galaxies follows predictable patterns governed by gravity, nuclear physics, and fluid dynamics. In the early universe, quantum fluctuations, tiny variations in energy density, were amplified by gravity during cosmic inflation, seeding the formation of galaxies billions of years later. Computer simulations reveal that these initially random fluctuations evolve into a cosmic web of galaxy clusters connected by filaments, with vast voids in between, a structure strikingly reminiscent of neurons in the brain or the mycelial networks of fungi. This similarity between the cosmic web and neural networks is not merely superficial. Both systems evolve to efficiently transmit information or matter across vast distances while minimizing energy expenditure. The astrophysicist Franco Vazza and the neurologist Alberto Folletti published a study in 2020 comparing the structural properties of neural networks in the human brain with the cosmic web of galaxies. They found remarkable similarities in the range of connection lengths, the clustering of nodes, and the fraction of matter contained in filaments. These parallels between structures at vastly different scales, from neurons measuring micrometers to cosmic filaments spanning hundreds of millions of light-years, suggest that similar organizational principles emerge regardless of the substrate. The universe appears to solve similar problems in similar ways across widely different contexts. In 2015, researchers at the University of California, San Diego, used network theory to analyze the structure of the universe based on observations from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. They found that galaxies form into a hierarchical structure optimized for the efficient flow of matter and energy, precisely the kind of organization that characterizes other complex networks like neural systems, river basins, and transportation infrastructures. The mathematician Stephen Strogatz has explored how synchronization spontaneously emerges in complex systems, from the simultaneous flashing of fireflies to the coordinated firing of cardiac cells. In his 2003 book Sync, Strogatz describes how mathematical models can explain these collective behaviors, which arise from the interactions of individual components following simple rules. Once again, we find complex, coordinated behavior emerging from basic algorithmic principles. Even the apparent randomness in nature often conceals underlying order. Chaos theory, pioneered by meteorologist Edward Lorenz in the 1960s, revealed that deterministic systems can produce unpredictable outcomes due to extreme sensitivity to initial conditions, the famous butterfly effect. Yet within chaotic systems, strange attractors emerge, regions of phase space toward which the system tends to evolve, creating pattern within apparent randomness. The Mandelbrot set, a fractal shape generated by a simple iterative equation involving complex numbers, exemplifies this principle. Despite its infinitely complex boundary, the set is deterministically generated from a straightforward mathematical rule. The endless variety of natural forms, from clouds to mountain ranges, from leaf shapes to animal coat patterns, may likewise arise from relatively simple developmental rules playing out in different contexts and initial conditions. In developmental biology, the process by which a single fertilized egg develops into a complex organism with specialized tissues and organs has long fascinated scientists. How does a uniform ball of cells differentiate into heart, brain, liver, and lungs? The answer lies in genetic regulatory networks, systems of genes that activate and inhibit one another according to specific rules. In the 1950s, Alan Turing, better known for his pioneering work in computer science, proposed a mathematical model for how chemicals diffusing through tissue could create patterns during embryonic development. His reaction diffusion model showed how two substances interacting, an activator that promotes its own production and an inhibitor that blocks the activator, could spontaneously form spots, stripes, or other patterns observed in animal coat markings. Later research confirmed that Turing's mechanism explains many biological patterns, from the spots on leopards to the ridges on sand dunes, from the arrangement of hair follicles to the spacing of teeth. The French mathematician René Thom extended this work with his catastrophe theory in the 1960s, describing how continuous changes in parameters can lead to discontinuous changes in form, like the sudden transition from a single-celled embryo to a multicellular organism with bilateral symmetry. These developmental processes illustrate another key aspect of nature's algorithm: the role of feedback loops. In negative feedback, a system responds to changes by counteracting them, maintaining stability, like how your body maintains a constant temperature despite environmental fluctuations. In positive feedback, changes are amplified, leading to rapid transitions or growth, like how a small embryonic structure can trigger cascading developmental changes that produce an entire limb. Systems biologist Yuri Alon discovered in the early 2000s that certain patterns of gene regulation, which he called network motifs, appear repeatedly in organisms from bacteria to humans. These motifs, such as feed-forward loops and negative autoregulation, represent optimal solutions to common regulatory problems, like maintaining stable protein levels or responding rapidly to environmental signals. Evolution has converged on these same circuit designs across vastly different species, suggesting they represent fundamental organizational principles. The emerging field of systems biology seeks to understand these regulatory networks holistically, recognizing that biological systems cannot be fully understood by studying their components in isolation. As Nobel laureate Sidney Brenner remarked, "In the past, we had to take things apart to understand them. In the future, we will need to put them together to understand them." This holistic perspective extends to ecosystems as well. Ecologist Robert May demonstrated in the 1970s that the stability of food webs depends on the patterns of interaction between species. Too many connections create instability, while too few lead to fragility. Natural ecosystems typically exhibit a small world network structure, with most species connected to only a few others but with short path lengths between any two species. This architecture balances robustness with efficiency, allowing ecosystems to respond to perturbations without collapsing. The universal patterns we observe in nature, from the atomic to the astronomical, from the inorganic to the living, suggest that there exists a finite set of organizational principles that the universe employs repeatedly. These principles are not imposed from outside but emerge from the fundamental physics of matter and energy, the mathematics of networks and information, and the evolutionary pressures that shape living systems. Perhaps the most fundamental of these principles is the tendency of energy to flow from concentrated to dispersed states, the inexorable increase in entropy described by the second law of thermodynamics. Yet, as physicist Erwin Schrödinger noted in his 1944 book, What is Life? Living organisms maintain their complex, ordered structure by continually drawing in energy from their environment and expelling waste, increasing entropy elsewhere while decreasing it locally. This process, known as dissipative adaptation, explains how order can spontaneously emerge in far-from equilibrium systems. Recent theoretical work by Jeremy England at MIT suggests that under the right conditions, matter will naturally organize itself to more efficiently dissipate energy, potentially explaining the origin of life itself as an inevitable consequence of thermodynamics, rather than an improbable accident. In 2017, England and his colleagues demonstrated that simple particles subjected to periodic energy pulses can spontaneously organize into structures that more efficiently absorb and dissipate that energy. This principle might explain why life harnesses sunlight through photosynthesis and why complex metabolic networks evolve to more efficiently extract energy from food sources. The capacity for self-organization extends beyond living systems. In the 1970s, chemist Ilya Prigogine studied chemical oscillators like the Belousov-Zhabotinsky reaction, in which reactants spontaneously form pulsating spiral patterns. These chemical systems, though not alive, exhibit behaviors reminiscent of living organisms. They maintain their structure far from equilibrium by consuming energy, they respond to external stimuli, and they can even reproduce their patterns. Similarly, in fluid dynamics, the formation of Bénard cells, hexagonal convection patterns that appear in heated liquids, demonstrates how energy flow can create ordered structures from initially uniform conditions. When a liquid is heated from below, molecules near the bottom become less dense and rise, while cooler molecules at the top sink. This convective flow spontaneously organizes into regular hexagonal cells that efficiently transfer heat from bottom to top. These examples highlight a common theme in nature's algorithm: the emergence of form and function through the self-organization of matter in response to energy flows and physical constraints. From this perspective, life itself appears not as an aberration in an entropic universe, but as a natural extension of physical principles that govern all matter. The biochemist Stuart Kauffman proposed that the origin of life might be understood as an autocatalytic set, a collection of molecules that mutually catalyze each other's production, creating a self-sustaining chemical system. In his 1993 book, The Origins of Order, Kauffman argued that such systems might spontaneously emerge when a certain critical complexity of interacting chemicals is reached, making the emergence of lifelike chemistry not just possible but probable under the right conditions. Recent experimental work supports aspects of this hypothesis. In 2019, researchers at the University of Groningen created a synthetic cell-like system in which DNA transcription, RNA translation, and protein synthesis formed a self-sustaining cycle that could continue indefinitely given a supply of building blocks and energy. Though far simpler than even the most primitive cell, This system demonstrates how the basic processes of life can emerge from the interaction of non-living components following simple chemical rules. The transition from chemistry to biology, from non-living to living, remains one of the greatest mysteries in science. Yet the algorithmic principles we observe across nature suggest that this transition may represent a continuation of patterns already present in the physical world rather than a fundamental discontinuity. Consider the structure of a cell membrane, a lipid bilayer that forms spontaneously when phospholipid molecules are placed in water. The physical properties of these molecules, with hydrophilic heads and hydrophobic tails, cause them to self-assemble into spherical structures that separate inside from outside. No external design is needed. The pattern emerges naturally from the chemical properties of the components and their environment. Similarly, the genetic code that translates nucleic acid sequences into proteins likely evolved from simpler chemical affinities between amino acids and nucleotide sequences. Recent research by biophysicists Tlusty suggests that the structure of the genetic code optimizes for robustness against mutations, allowing evolution to explore new protein functions while minimizing the risk of catastrophic errors. The fact that the same 20 amino acids form the building blocks of proteins across all life on Earth, from bacteria to humans, suggests that this particular set represents an optimal solution for creating the diverse structures needed for biological function. Computer simulations by Stephen Freeland and others indicate that the standard set of amino acids covers chemical space more efficiently than random selections would, providing evidence that natural selection has optimized this fundamental aspect of life's chemistry. Even the three-dimensional structures of proteins, the molecular machines that perform most cellular functions, form through a process of spontaneous folding governed by the physical interactions between amino acids. While the sequence of amino acids is specified by genes, the folding process itself follows physical principles of energy minimization, with the protein settling into its most stable configuration through a process that computer scientist Christoph Flamm has compared to a landscape of mountains and valleys. This concept of an energy landscape appears throughout nature's algorithm. Chemical reactions proceed along pathways that minimize energy barriers. Ecosystems evolve toward states that maximize energy flow through the system. Even neural networks in the brain can be understood as settling into low-energy states that correspond to memories or learned behaviors. In 2016, neuroscientist Carl Friston proposed the free energy principle, suggesting that all adaptive systems, from single cells to complex brains, act to minimize surprise, the difference between their model of the world and their sensory inputs. This principle potentially unifies perception, learning, and action under a single framework based on energy minimization, linking the behavior of living systems to fundamental physical principles. The neuroscientist Olaf Sporns has mapped the structural and functional connections in the human brain, the connectome, revealing that neural networks exhibit the same organizational principles found in other complex systems. Modular structure, small world connectivity, and hub nodes that link different regions. These architectural features optimize the brain for both segregated processing of specific information and integrated coordination across regions. Research by Sebastian Sung at Princeton University suggests that the specific pattern of connections between neurons, not just their number or arrangement, encodes our memories, skills, and possibly our identities. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons with an estimated 100 trillion synaptic connections, creating a network of staggering complexity. Yet this complexity emerges from relatively simple developmental rules governing how neurons grow, form connections, and strengthen or weaken those connections based on activity. The phenomenon of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself throughout life by forming new neural connections, follows the Hebbian principle articulated by Donald Hebb in 1949. Neurons that fire together wire together. This simple rule, implemented across billions of neurons, gives rise to the brain's remarkable capacity for learning and adaptation. Similar principles of self-organization and adaptation appear in collective animal behavior. The coordinated movements of bird flocks, Fish schools and insect swarms emerge from individuals following simple rules about maintaining distance from neighbors and matching their direction. No central coordinator directs these complex collective behaviors. They emerge spontaneously from local interactions, as demonstrated by computer models developed by scientists like Ian Cousin. In 2010, Cousin and colleagues showed that when fish make decisions as a group, they average their individual preferences, but as the strength of preference increases in a minority of individuals, the group can suddenly switch to follow this minority view. This wisdom of crowds effect, where collective decision-making outperforms most individuals, represents another example of how simple interaction rules can produce sophisticated collective behaviors. Human social systems exhibit similar emergent properties. In 1971, economist Thomas Schelling demonstrated that residential segregation patterns can emerge from individuals having only mild preferences for living near others similar to themselves. His simple model showed how slight biases at the individual level can produce dramatic segregation at the community level, an early example of how agent-based modeling can reveal emergent social phenomena. More recently, network scientists like Albert Laszlo Barabasi have shown that many human-created networks, from the World Wide Web to scientific collaboration networks, exhibit a scale-free structure with a few highly connected nodes and many sparsely connected ones. This architecture emerges naturally when new nodes preferentially connect to already well-connected nodes, a process Barabasi called preferential attachment. Even human creativity, often considered the pinnacle of consciousness, may follow algorithmic principles. The cognitive scientist Margaret Bowden distinguishes between combinatorial creativity, connecting existing ideas in new ways, and exploratory creativity, searching a conceptual space for novel possibilities. Both processes can be modeled computationally and potentially understood as explorations of an abstract landscape of possibilities, constrained by rules but open to innovation. The mathematician Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff have proposed that quantum effects in neural microtubules might underlie human consciousness, potentially linking our subjective experience to the fundamental physics of the universe. While their orchestrated objective reduction theory remains controversial, it represents an attempt to bridge the explanatory gap between physical processes and conscious experience through the mathematics of quantum mechanics. As we extend our gaze from the quantum realm to cosmic structures, from simple chemical reactions to complex ecosystems, from neural networks to human societies, we find that similar organizational principles appear repeatedly. These principles, energy minimization, information processing, feedback regulation, modular structure, fractal scaling, self-organization, and adaptation, constitute the elements of nature's universal algorithm. This algorithmic view of nature has profound philosophical implications. If the complexity and diversity we observe around us emerge from the operation of relatively simple rules, then perhaps the universe is more comprehensible than it first appears. The apparent gulf between physical law and biological function, or between neural activity and conscious experience, may not be unbridgeable chasms but rather continuous landscapes shaped by the same underlying principles. Physicist John Wheeler captured this perspective in his concept of it from bit, the idea that the physical world, it, ultimately derives from information, bit. Wheeler suggested that the universe is fundamentally participatory, with observers playing a role in bringing reality into existence through measurement and interaction. This view resonates with recent developments in quantum information theory, which treats information not just as a description of physical systems but as a fundamental physical quantity itself. The information theoretic approach has gained traction in multiple fields. In evolutionary biology, David Walpert and colleagues have framed natural selection as an algorithm that increases the mutual information between organisms and their environments over time. In neuroscience, theorists like Carl Friston model perception and learning as processes that minimize prediction errors by updating internal models of the world. In physics, researchers exploring quantum gravity, such as Fotini Markopola, have proposed that spacetime itself might emerge from networks of quantum information. These convergent perspectives suggest that information processing, the algorithmic manipulation of patterns, may be the most fundamental aspect of reality, unifying domains that previously seemed disparate. From this viewpoint, nature's secret algorithm is not so much a specific set of equations as it is a hierarchy of information processing systems, each level emerging from and constrained by the levels below, yet exhibiting new properties and capabilities through their organization. The physicist Philip Anderson captured this concept in his influential 1972 paper, More is Different, arguing that reality is arranged in levels, each with its own emergent laws that cannot be reduced entirely to the levels below. While elementary particles obey the laws of quantum mechanics, their collective behavior gives rise to the properties of atoms, which in turn combine to create molecules with chemical properties, which assemble into cells with biological functions, which form organisms with psychological experiences, which interact in social systems with cultural dynamics. At each level of this hierarchy, new patterns and principles emerge that cannot be predicted solely from knowledge of the components. Yet these emergent properties are not magical or supernatural. They arise from the algorithmic interactions of simpler elements, following rules that we can discover and describe mathematically. This hierarchical view helps resolve the apparent tension between reductionism, explaining phenomena in terms of their constituent parts, and holism, understanding systems as integrated wholes with properties beyond the sum of their parts. Both approaches capture essential aspects of nature's algorithm, the fundamental rules governing components and the emergent patterns arising from their interactions. As we continue to explore the natural world, from the mysteries of quantum gravity to the complexities of human consciousness, we may find that the boundaries between disciplines, physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, sociology, are more fluid than they appear. The secret algorithm nature uses to build everything may ultimately be recognized not as a single equation or formula but as a nested hierarchy of information processing systems, each level implementing and extending the computational capacities of the levels below. This perspective invites us to see connections across domains, to recognize patterns that span traditional boundaries, and to appreciate how complexity and diversity can emerge from simplicity and unity. In doing so, we may come closer to answering not just how the universe works, but why it works the way it does, why these particular rules and not others give rise to the rich tapestry of reality we experience. The quest to understand nature's algorithm continues, driven by human curiosity and enabled by increasingly sophisticated tools for observation, experimentation, and computation. Each discovery reveals not just specific facts about particular phenomena but also glimpses of the universal patterns that connect seemingly disparate aspects of our world. In this ongoing exploration, we may find that the most profound insight is not any specific equation or theory, but the recognition that the universe itself is computational, that information and its transformation constitute the fundamental fabric of reality. As we decode nature's algorithm, we are not merely passive observers but active participants in the universe's ongoing computation, adding our own layer of complexity to the grand algorithm that builds everything.